You're listening to Scary Sleep Stories presents The Dark Hours.
Welcome, guys. I know a lot of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before you drift off like the video, subscribe if you're new, and comment what time it is right now. Let's see who's still awake and who's not alone tonight. Let's begin.
The moment her hand touched my arm, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. Her fingers were ice cold, her grip unnaturally strong. As I looked into her eyes, pleading for help, I saw nothing but emptiness. And that's when I realized this wasn't a stranded motorist. This was a trap. I'd been driving for hours. The monotony of the rural highway broken only by the occasional flicker of my headlights, catching a road sign or the eyes of some nocturnal creature. It was past midnight, and I was on my last delivery run of the night. As a driver for a small courier company, these late-night routes were part of the job. Usually, they were uneventful. Boring, even. But not tonight. I first saw her about a mile back, a lone figure on the side of the road, arm outstretched in the universal sign for a hitchhiker. At first, I drove past. Company policy strictly forbade picking up strangers. But something made me slow down, glancing in my rearview mirror. She looked so vulnerable standing there in the dark. Young, maybe early 20s, with long dark hair whipping around her face in the wind. I could see she was shivering, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Against my better judgment, I found myself pulling over. As I put the van in park and rolled down the passenger window, I called out, "You okay? Need some help?" She approached slowly, relief evident on her face. "Oh, thank God," she said, her voice trembling. "My car broke down a few miles back, and I've been walking for hours. Could you please give me a ride to the next town?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to drive away, but it was cold out, and the next town was at least 20 miles away. What kind of person would I be if I left her here? "All right," I said, unlocking the doors. "Hop in. I can take you as far as Millbrook." Her smile was grateful as she climbed into the passenger seat. "Thank you so much. You're a lifesaver." We drove in silence for a few minutes. I could feel her shivering next to me, so I turned up the heat. "I'm Jake, by the way," I said, trying to break the ice. "Sarah," she replied, offering a small smile. As we talked, I found myself relaxing. Sarah was easy to chat with, and I felt good about helping her out. But as we drove deeper into the night, things started to feel off. I noticed Sarah kept glancing in the side mirror, as if looking for something behind us. And when I asked about her broken-down car, her story seemed to change slightly with each telling. "So, what kind of car do you drive?" I asked casually, trying to pin down the details. Sarah hesitated a beat too long before answering. "Oh, it's a blue sedan. Nothing special." But I distinctly remembered her saying it was red earlier. My unease grew as I realized we were now in the most isolated stretch of the route. Nothing but dense forest on either side of the road for miles. That's when I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. A car approaching fast from behind. Sarah saw it too. Her entire demeanor changed in an instant. Gone was the grateful, shivering girl. In her place sat someone else entirely. Cold, calculating, dangerous. "Pull over," she commanded, her voice hard. "What? Why?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. "Just do it," she snapped, reaching into her jacket. The glint of metal caught my eye. A gun. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was a setup. I slowed the van, my mind racing. If I stopped, I was dead. But if I tried to run, in that split second of indecision, Sarah made the choice for me. She grabbed the wheel, jerking it hard to the right. The van swerved violently. I fought for control, but the tires caught the soft shoulder of the road. We were going too fast. The world spun as the van rolled once, twice, before coming to rest on its side in the ditch. For a moment, everything was silent except for the hiss of the radiator and the ringing in my ears. Then, Pain hit me in waves. My head throbbed where it had struck the window, and I could feel warm blood trickling down my face. I blinked, trying to orient myself. Sarah was gone, the passenger door hanging open above me. Outside, I could hear voices. Male voices. "Check the van," someone shouted. "Make sure he's alive. Boss wants him breathing." Panic gave me strength I didn't know I had. I unbuckled my seatbelt, falling awkwardly onto the driver's side door. Every movement sent shards of pain through my body, but I forced myself to move. The back of the van was a mess, packages strewn everywhere. But among the chaos, I spotted my salvation, a small pry bar we used for stubborn crates. I grabbed it just as a face appeared in the shattered windshield, a man, mid-30s, with a scar running down his cheek. His eyes widened when he saw me conscious. "He's awake!" he yelled to someone behind him. "Get over here!" I didn't give him a chance to say more. With all my strength, I swung the pry bar. It connected with a sickening crunch, and the man fell back with a cry of pain. Using the bar, I managed to force open the driver's side door enough to squeeze through. As I emerged from the wreckage, I got my first clear look at my attackers. There were 4 of them, including Sarah, all armed, all looking at me with a mixture of surprise and anger. "Don't move," one of them growled, raising his gun. But I was already running, fueled by adrenaline and sheer terror. I plunged into the forest, branches whipping my face as I crashed through the underbrush. Behind me, I could hear them shouting, their voices getting fainter as I put distance between us. But I didn't slow down. I couldn't. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Only then did I allow myself to stop, collapsing behind a fallen tree. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of pursuit. Nothing but the normal sounds of the forest at night. As my breathing slowed, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I was lost in the woods, injured, with no phone and no idea which direction led to safety. And somewhere out there, 4 armed individuals were hunting me. I allowed myself a moment of despair, but only a moment. I couldn't give up. I had to keep moving. Using the stars to orient myself, I began to walk. Every shadow made me jump. Every snapping twig sent my heart racing. But I pressed on. Hours passed. The sky began to lighten, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees. And then, like a miracle, I heard it. The distant sound of traffic. New energy flooded through me. I quickened my pace, following the sound. Finally, the trees thinned, and I found myself on the edge of a highway. A different highway than the one I'd been on, but a path to salvation nonetheless. I flagged down the first car I saw, probably looking like a madman with my bloodied face and torn clothes. The elderly couple inside seemed terrified, but they stopped. "Please," I gasped. "I need help. Someone's after me." They must have seen the desperation in my eyes because the man nodded, unlocking the doors. "Get in, son. We'll take you to the police." As we drove, I recounted my harrowing night. The couple listened in shocked silence, the woman clutching her husband's arm. At the police station, my story was met with skepticism at first, but as I described Sarah and the others in detail, I saw recognition dawn in the detective's eyes. "We've had reports of a group operating like this along I-80, he said, his expression grim. "Targeting lone drivers, especially truckers and delivery personnel. But this is the first time someone's escaped to tell us about it." Over the next few weeks, I worked with the police in giving statements, looking at mugshots. They found my van, but Sarah and her accomplices had vanished. I couldn't go back to my old job. The thought of driving those lonely roads at night filled me with paralyzing fear. But in a way, Sarah and her crew had given me a gift, a story, a warning. I started writing, sharing my experience online. It resonated with people, especially other drivers. Soon I was giving talks, advocating for better safety measures for long-haul drivers and couriers. My brush with death had given me a new purpose, and while I still look over my shoulder more often than I'd like, I know that by speaking out, I might just save someone else from falling into the same trap. Because out there on the dark highways, not everyone who asks for help is a victim. Sometimes, the real danger is in being too willing to trust a stranger. The first footprint I saw could have been my own. The second, maybe a fellow hiker's. But the third, perfectly formed and definitely not mine, sent a chill down my spine. Someone was following me, and in the vast wilderness of the Rockies, that could only mean one thing. I was being hunted. I'd always loved solo camping. There's something about the solitude, the raw connection with nature that you just can't get when you're with other people. This trip was supposed to be my escape. A week-long trek through some of the most beautiful and isolated terrain in Colorado. I'd planned meticulously, packing enough supplies to last me 10 days, just in case. A satellite phone was my only concession to safety, and even that I'd promised myself I'd use only in the direst emergency. The first 3 days were everything I'd hoped for. The weather was perfect, crisp mountain air filling my lungs as I hiked through alpine meadows and dense forests. At night, I'd fall asleep to the sound of a nearby stream, the Milky Way stretching overhead in a dazzling display you never see in the city. It was on the fourth morning that things changed. I woke just before dawn, as usual, eager to break camp and get an early start. That's when I saw it, a set of footprints in the soft earth near my tent. At first, I dismissed them. I must have made them last night and forgotten, I told myself. But as I followed their trail with my eyes, my blood ran cold. They circled my entire campsite, coming right up to my tent at one point. Someone had been watching me sleep. I packed up faster than I ever had before, my hands shaking as I stuffed my gear into my backpack. Part of me wanted to use the satellite phone right then to call for help. But what would I say? That I saw some footprints. I had no proof of any real danger, and the rational part of my brain was still trying to come up with logical explanations. So I hiked on, following my planned route but with a new sense of urgency. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. By midday, I was exhausted, more from the constant state of alertness than from the physical exertion. I stopped by a small lake to refill my water bottles and try to calm my nerves. That's when I saw the reflection in the water, a figure standing on the ridge above me, partially hidden by a tree. I whirled around, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Had I imagined it? The stress playing tricks on my mind? I didn't stay to find out. I grabbed my pack and started moving again, no longer caring about following my planned route. My only goal now was to put as much distance between me and whoever or whatever was out there. As the day wore on, the evidence became harder to dismiss. A freshly broken branch here, a disturbed patch of moss there. Small signs that someone was paralleling my route, staying just out of sight. By the time I made camp that night, I was a wreck. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. I didn't dare light a fire, instead choking down a cold meal of trail mix and beef jerky. Sleep was out of the question. I sat with my back against a tree, a small folding knife clutched in my hand, straining my eyes against the darkness. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving around my campsite. I held my breath, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. It seemed to be coming from all around me. Then, a voice, low and gravelly. "I know you're awake. Why don't you come out and say hello?" Terror gripped me. This was real. This was happening. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer out. "What do you want?" A chuckle, cold and mirthless. "What do I want?" "Oh, city boy, out here, it's not about want. It's about need. And right now, I need you to start running." I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted, leaving my tent and most of my gear behind. The only things I had were what I'd been clutching all night: my knife, the satellite phone, and a small pack with some water and energy bars. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear him, Not running, but moving steadily, confidently. He knew these woods. This was his territory, and I was nothing but prey. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I allowed myself to slow down, gasping for breath. I couldn't keep running forever. I needed a plan. The satellite phone. I pulled it out with trembling hands, praying for a signal. 1 bar. It would have to do. As I was dialing, a sharp crack split the air. The phone exploded in my hand, pieces of plastic and electronics scattering on the forest floor. The shot had come from behind me, too close for comfort. The voice called out, closer now. That would be cheating. This is between you and me, city boy. I ran again, fueled by a new surge of adrenaline. But I knew I couldn't outrun him forever. I needed to outsmart him. I found a stream and started following it downstream, hoping the water would mask my scent and cover my tracks. As I moved, my mind raced, trying to recall every survival tip I'd ever read or seen on TV. After about a mile, I veered off suddenly, backtracking along the bank before heading off in a new direction. It wasn't much, but I hoped it might buy me some time, make him think I was still following the stream. I found a dense thicket and crawled inside, trying to slow my breathing, to become as silent and still as possible. And I waited. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold fear that gripped me. I heard him pass by twice, muttering to himself, clearly frustrated at having lost my trail. As dusk approached, I knew I had to move. I couldn't stay hidden forever, and I was no closer to safety than I had been this morning. Slowly, carefully, I emerged from my hiding spot. That's when I saw it. A glint of metal in the fading light. A trap, not 10 feet from where I'd been hiding. If I'd tried to run earlier, I would have stumbled right into it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just tracking me. He was hurting me, driving me towards his traps. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment hunt. This was a game he'd played before. With this new understanding came a grim determination. I wasn't going to be his prey any longer. It was time to turn the tables. I started moving again, but with purpose now. I laid false trails, doubled back on myself, used every trick I could think of to confuse my trail. And all the while, I watched for more traps, for signs of his passage. As night fell, I found what I was looking for, his camp. It was well hidden, but in his arrogance, he'd underestimated me. He hadn't expected his prey to become the hunter. I watched from the shadows as he returned, clearly angry at having lost me. He threw down his rifle and slumped by the fire, muttering curses. This was my chance. I crept closer, my hand tightening around my small knife. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. A twig snapped under my foot. His head whipped around, eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, we just stared at each other, prey and predator. Roles suddenly reversed. Then, everything happened at once. He lunged for his rifle. I threw myself forward, knife outstretched. We collided, rolling on the ground, each fighting for survival. He was stronger, but I was desperate. Somehow, in the chaos, my knife found its mark. He let out a gasp, more of surprise than pain, and then went still. I scrambled away, shocked at what I'd done. But there was no time for regret or moral quandaries. I grabbed his rifle and satellite phone, and I ran. It took search and rescue 2 days to find me. By then, I was dehydrated, exhausted, and on the verge of collapse. As the helicopter lifted me to safety, I looked down at the vast wilderness below. It no longer seemed beautiful. Now, it just looked like a place to hide bodies. The authorities found his camp, and with it, evidence of other victims. The man who had hunted me was wanted in 3 states for a string of disappearances. In the end, my nightmare had saved lives. The moment I saw my reflection blink, I knew something was terribly wrong. I stood frozen in front of the bathroom mirror, my heart pounding as I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew the truth. Someone had been watching me, and they were much closer than I ever could have imagined. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. After months of grueling work and a nasty breakup, I'd decided to treat myself to a week-long stay at a secluded cabin in the woods. The listing had promised peace, quiet, and all the modern amenities a city girl like me could want. It seemed perfect. When I arrived, I was immediately charmed. The cabin was rustic but beautifully maintained, with a cozy living room, a fully equipped kitchen, and a bedroom that looked out over a serene lake. The owner, a friendly older woman named Margaret, gave me a quick tour before handing over the keys. "Now, don't you worry about a thing," she'd said with a warm smile. "You've got the whole place to yourself. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. It's just you and nature out here." If only I'd known how wrong she was. The first couple of days were blissful. I spent my time hiking the nearby trails, reading on the porch, and generally decompressing from the stress of city life. By the third day, I felt more relaxed than I had in years. That evening, I decided to treat myself to a long, hot bath. As I soaked in the clawfoot tub, letting the lavender-scented bubbles ease away the last of my tension, I noticed something odd about the mirror hanging on the opposite wall. There was a small, dark spot in the corner, barely noticeable unless you were really looking. Curiosity piqued. I got out of the tub and wrapped myself in a towel. As I approached the mirror, my wet feet leaving damp prints on the wooden floor, I realized what I was looking at. It was a camera lens, expertly hidden within the mirror's ornate frame. My blood ran cold. Someone had been watching me. How long had it been there? How many other guests had been unknowingly recorded in their most private moments? With shaking hands, I began to search the rest of the bathroom. Now that I knew what to look for, I found 2 more hidden cameras, one in the light fixture, another disguised as a coat hook. Panic rising in my throat, I moved to the bedroom. More cameras. The living room. The kitchen. Even on the porch. They were everywhere. I felt violated, exposed, and utterly terrified. Who was watching? What did they want? I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police in, but there was no signal. Of course. I was miles from the nearest cell tower. That's when I heard it. A soft creak from somewhere in the house. I froze, straining my ears. Another creak. Closer this time. Footsteps. Someone was inside. I looked around frantically for a weapon. Anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a heavy brass candlestick on the mantel. I grabbed it, its weight reassuring in my hands. The footsteps were in the hallway now, approaching the living room where I stood. I raised the candlestick, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard. A figure appeared in the doorway. A man, tall and lean, with a face I recognized instantly. It was Margaret, the owner. Or rather, it was Margaret without her wig and makeup. "Well, well," he said, his voice no longer the warm, motherly tone I remembered. "Looks like my little mouse has figured out the game." I tightened my grip on the candlestick. "Who are you? What do you want?" He chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Who I am doesn't matter. As for what I want, well, let's just say you're not the first guest to provide me with some quality entertainment." The implication of his words made me feel sick. "The cameras, how long have they been here?" "Oh, years now," he said, taking a step closer. I backed away, keeping the coffee table between us. "You'd be amazed how much people will pay for the right kind of footage, and you, my dear, have been quite the star performer." I felt a surge of rage cut through my fear. "You sick bastard, I'm calling the police." He laughed again, pulling something from his pocket. My cell phone. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. You really should be more careful with your belongings." I glanced at the door, wondering if I could make a run for it, but he was blocking the only exit, and I knew he'd be on me in seconds if I tried. Now, he said, his tone becoming businesslike, we have two options here. One, you can try to fight, to run. I promise you, it won't end well. Or two, you can be a good girl and do exactly as I say. Who knows? You might even enjoy your new career. The thought of submitting to this monster made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to appear defeated, my shoulders slumping as I lowered the candlestick. That's better, he said, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. He took another step closer. I knew you'd see reason. That's when I made my move. As he reached for me, I swung the candlestick with all my might. It connected with his head with a sickening thud, and he crumpled to the floor. I didn't wait to see if he was out cold. I ran, snatching my phone from where it had fallen. I burst out of the cabin and into the cool night air, my bare feet slapping against the dirt path as I sprinted towards the main road. I could hear him behind me, shouting threats and obscenities, but fear gave me speed I didn't know I possessed. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. Finally, blessedly, I saw headlights in the distance. I saw a car approaching on the main road. I waved my arms frantically, praying they'd stop. The car slowed, then pulled over. An elderly couple peered out at me, their faces etched with concern. "Please," I gasped. "You have to help me. There's a man. He's after me." They didn't ask questions. The woman opened the back door, and I scrambled in. As we drove away, I saw a figure emerge from the woods in the rearview mirror. Even from a distance, I could feel his rage. At the police station, my story was met with initial skepticism, but when they raided the cabin, they found not only the cameras but hard drives full of footage of me and of countless other victims. The man, whose real name turned out to be Gerald Simmons, was arrested. The investigation revealed a sophisticated operation that had been running for years. He'd been selling the videos on the dark web, catering to voyeurs with deep pockets. In the weeks that followed, I struggled to come to terms with what had happened. The violation, the fear, the knowledge that intimate moments of my life were out there, potentially seen by who knows how many people. But as I worked with a therapist and connected with other survivors, I found my voice. I started speaking out, advocating for stricter regulations on vacation rentals and raising awareness about hidden cameras. It's been a year now, and I'd be lying if I said I was completely over it. I still check for cameras everywhere I go. I still have nightmares about being watched, but I'm healing, slowly but surely. And every time I share my story, every time I see the recognition and gratitude in someone's eyes, I know that something good has come out of my nightmare, because now when I look in the mirror, I don't see a victim. I see a survivor, a fighter, and a protector. The cabin in the woods took something from me, yes, but it also gave me a purpose. And in the end, that's worth more than any peaceful getaway ever could be. The first gunshot shattered the silence of the night, and with it, my illusion of safety. In that instant, I realized that this wasn't just a routine break-in. This was something far more dangerous, and I was trapped in the middle of it. I'd been working as a night security guard at the Millbrook Industrial Complex for just over 3 months. It was an easy gig, or so I thought. The complex was massive, a sprawling maze of warehouses and office buildings on the outskirts of town. But at night, it was a ghost town. My job was simple: make my rounds, check the locks, and keep an eye on the security cameras. That night started like any other. I arrived for my shift at 10 p.m., relieving Dave, the evening guard. We went through our usual handover routine, nothing out of the ordinary to report. Quiet as a graveyard out there, Dave had said with a chuckle as he left. "Try not to fall asleep, Jake." If only he knew how wrong he was. It was around 2 a.m. when I first noticed something was off. I was in the main security office, eyes glazing over as I stared at the bank of monitors showing feeds from cameras all over the complex. Something moved on one of the screens, a flicker of shadow that didn't belong. I sat up straighter, suddenly alert. There it was again, on a different camera. a figure darting between buildings. My heart rate picked up. This wasn't some teenager looking for a thrill or a homeless person seeking shelter. The way they moved, quick and purposeful, spoke of something more sinister. I reached for the phone, ready to call the police, when the alarms started blaring. Red lights flashed across the monitors as multiple security breaches were detected simultaneously. This was coordinated, professional. I was reaching for my radio to alert the off-site security team when the first gunshot rang out. The sound echoed through the empty complex, and I saw muzzle flashes on one of the cameras. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a break-in, this was an armed assault. I knew I should stay put, lock the door, and wait for the police. That's what we were trained to do. But something inside me couldn't just sit there. I had to know what they were after. Had to try and stop them if I could. Grabbing my flashlight and keycard, I slipped out of the security office. The complex was eerily quiet now, the alarms having shut off automatically after 60 seconds to avoid drawing too much attention. In the distance, I could hear muffled voices and the sound of breaking glass. I moved carefully through the maze of corridors, my shoes squeaking on the polished floors. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound amplified in the tense silence. As I rounded a corner, I saw them. 3 men, dressed in black, wearing ski masks. They were trying to break into one of the high-security labs, the kind that even I didn't have access to. I ducked back behind the corner, my heart pounding. What the hell was I doing? I was a rent-a-cop with a flashlight, up against armed intruders. This was insane. But I couldn't just walk away. Whatever was in that lab, it was important enough for these guys to risk an armed robbery. I had to do something. I looked around, desperate for anything I could use as a weapon or a distraction. My eyes landed on the fire alarm on the wall. It was a risk. The noise would alert the intruders to my presence, but it might also scare them off. Taking a deep breath, I smashed the glass and pulled the lever. The effect was instantaneous. Sirens blared and sprinklers activated, drenching everything in seconds. I heard shouts of surprise and anger from around the corner. Using the chaos as cover, I peered around the edge. The men were no longer at the lab door. They were running, heading towards the exit. Relief flooded through me. It had worked. They were leaving. But then one of them stopped, turning back. Even through the ski mask, I could see his eyes narrow as they landed on me. "Hey!" he shouted, raising his gun. I didn't think. I ran. Bullets whizzed past me as I sprinted down the corridor, zigzagging to make myself a harder target. I could hear their footsteps behind me, gaining ground. I knew the layout of the complex better than they did. It was my only advantage. I took a sharp left, then a right, leading them deeper into the maze of hallways. My lungs burned as I ran, fear and adrenaline pushing me faster than I'd ever moved. I needed a place to hide, somewhere I could lose them. The basement. The idea hit me like a bolt of lightning. The basement level was a warren of storage rooms and maintenance tunnels. If I could make it there, I might have a chance. I changed direction, heading for the nearest stairwell. The sound of pursuit was closer now, their shouts echoing off the walls. I burst through the stairwell door and practically flew down the steps, taking them 3 at a time. Behind me, I heard the door slam open again. They were right on my heels. The basement level was dark, emergency lights casting long shadows. I ran down the main corridor, my wet shoes slipping on the concrete floor. Left, right, another left. I turned corners at random, hoping to lose them in the maze. My chest felt like it was going to explode, but I didn't dare slow down. Finally, I spotted what I was looking for, a small maintenance closet, tucked away in a corner. I yanked the door open and squeezed inside, pulling it shut behind me. The closet was tiny, barely big enough for me to stand in. It smelled of cleaning products and damp. I held my breath, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. Footsteps approached, slowing as they neared my hiding spot. I could hear them breathing heavily just on the other side of the thin door. "Where'd he go?" one of them growled. "Check every door," another replied. "He's got to be here somewhere." I closed my eyes, willing myself to become invisible. My hand tightened around my flashlight, ready to use it as a weapon if necessary. The doorknob rattled. I tensed, preparing for the worst. But then, a sound that made my heart soar. Police sirens, growing louder by the second. "Shit!" one of the men exclaimed. "We've got to go, now!" I heard them run off, their footsteps fading into the distance. Still, I didn't move. I stayed in that closet, shaking with adrenaline and relief, until I heard the unmistakable sound of police radios and multiple footsteps. When I finally emerged, I was greeted by a team of very surprised police officers. The story spilled out of me in a rush. The break-in, the chase, everything. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across the complex, I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. The police had caught 2 of the 3 intruders as they tried to escape. The third was still at large. Detective Sarah Chen, the lead investigator, approached me with a grim expression. "You took one hell of a risk tonight, Jake," she said, her tone a mix of admiration and exasperation. "But thanks to you, we managed to stop a major theft. That lab they were trying to break into, it contains prototype technology worth millions." I nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. "Who were they?" I asked. Detective Chen sighed. "Professional thieves, working for a rival company. We've been tracking their operation for months, but we never expected them to be this bold." She paused, fixing me with a serious look. "You know, the department could use someone with your quick thinking and bravery. Ever considered a career in law enforcement?" I couldn't help but laugh. 12 hours ago, I was a bored security guard counting the minutes until my shift ended. Now I was being recruited by the police. As I watched the sun rise over the industrial complex, casting a golden glow over the scene of my night-long ordeal, I realized something. Life can change in an instant. One moment, you're going through the motions, and the next, you're running for your life, making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. I didn't know if I'd take Detective Chen up on her offer, but I did know one thing. I'd never look at my boring security job the same way again, because sometimes the most ordinary nights can turn into the most extraordinary adventures. And sometimes, the person you least expect to be a hero, even yourself, can rise to the occasion when it matters most. The moment the door slammed shut behind me, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The sound echoed through the empty house, a finality to it that sent chills down my spine. I was trapped, and the family-friendly facade of my clients had just crumbled away, revealing something far more sinister. It was supposed to be a routine showing. As a real estate agent in the upscale neighborhood of Oakwood Hills, I'd done hundreds of these. The Jensen property was a gem, a sprawling 6-bedroom mansion with all the bells and whistles the wealthy clients in this area desired. Pool, home theater, wine cellar, you name it. This place had it. When the Carters contacted me about viewing the property, I was thrilled. They seemed like the perfect buyers, a successful businessman, his elegant wife, and their 2 well-behaved children. They had the means and the motivation to make a quick sale. I remember thinking how lucky I was as I pulled up to the Jensen house that sunny Saturday afternoon. The Carters were already waiting, looking picture-perfect in their country club attire. "Mrs. Reeves," Mr. Carter greeted me with a firm handshake. "Thank you for meeting us on such short notice. Please, call me Sarah," I replied with my best sales smile. "Shall we begin the tour?" As we moved through the house, I pointed out all its features, from the gourmet kitchen to the luxurious master suite. The Carters seemed impressed, asking all the right questions. Mrs. Carter was particularly interested in the security system, which I assured her was top of the line. It wasn't until we reached the basement that things started to feel off. Mr. Carter's questions became more pointed, focused on the layout and any potential hidden spaces. "You never know when you might need a panic room," he joked, but there was an edge to his voice that made me uneasy. As we climbed the stairs back to the main floor, I felt Mrs. Carter's hand on my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Sarah, dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "Would you mind if we took another look at the master bedroom? I have a few more questions about the closet space." I nodded, leading the way back upstairs. Mr. Carter and the children stayed in the living room, engrossed in what looked like a heated discussion. The master bedroom was at the end of a long hallway. As we entered, I launched into my usual spiel about the custom cabinetry and designer fixtures, but Mrs. Carter wasn't listening. She was staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You know, Sarah," she said, taking a step closer, "we're not really here to buy a house." My heart skipped a beat. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." Her smile widened, revealing too many teeth. "Oh, I think you do. Or at least you will." That's when I felt a sharp pain in my neck. I spun around to see Mr. Carter standing behind me, an empty syringe in his hand. When had he come upstairs? What did you do to me?" I slurred, my vision already starting to blur. "Don't worry, dear," Mrs. Carter cooed. "Everything will make sense soon." The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the sound of their laughter, cold and cruel. When I came to, I was in a dimly lit room I didn't recognize. My head was pounding, and my mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized with growing horror that I was in some sort of cell. The walls were concrete, and a heavy metal door was the only exit. Panic set in as the memories came flooding back. The Carters, the house showing, the injection. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. I tried to stand, Mom, but my legs were wobbly, and I stumbled. That's when I noticed the chain. A thick metal shackle was fastened around my ankle, connected to a bolt in the floor. I was well and truly trapped. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time lost all meaning in that windowless room. I alternated between frantic attempts to escape and periods of despair where I huddled in the corner, sobbing. Finally, the door opened. Mr. Carter walked in, looking as polished as ever in his expensive suit. "Ah, good. You're awake," he said, as if we were meeting for a business lunch. "I hope you're finding your accommodations adequate." "Why are you doing this?" I croaked, my voice hoarse from screaming. He chuckled. "Why does anyone do anything, Sarah? For profit, of course. You see, there are people out there willing to pay a great deal of money for someone like you. Young, attractive, educated. You'll fetch a high price on the right market." The implication of his words hit me like a physical blow. Human trafficking. The horror stories I'd heard on the news suddenly became my reality. "You won't get away with this," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "People will look for me. The police." "The police," he laughed. "My dear, we've been doing this for years. By the time anyone realizes you're missing, you'll be long gone. Just another real estate agent who skipped town with her clients' deposits. It's a surprisingly common occurrence, you know." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Try to get some rest. We have a long journey ahead of us tomorrow." As the door slammed shut, I felt something inside me break. This was really happening. I was going to be sold like cattle, shipped off to God knows where, never to be seen again. But as the initial shock wore off, something else took its place. Anger, determination. I refused to be a victim. I had to find a way out. I examined every inch of my cell, looking for weaknesses. The chain was solid, the walls impenetrable, but the door, the hinges looked old, rusty. If I could somehow reach them, I tore a strip of fabric from my blouse and began to braid it, making it as strong as possible. Then, I started working on the bolt in the floor. It was secure, but the concrete around it was crumbling. If I could loosen it just enough. Hours passed as I worked, my fingers bloody and raw. But finally, I felt the bolt give way. I was free of the chain. Using my makeshift rope, I managed to reach the door hinges. They were as weak as I'd hoped. With enough pressure, they began to creak and bend. Just as I heard the satisfying snap of the last hinge giving way, footsteps echoed down the hall. They were coming. I pressed myself against the wall next to the door, my heart pounding. This was my only chance. The door swung open, and Mrs. Carter stepped in. "Time to go, dear. You're new." I didn't let her finish. I slammed into her with all my might, knocking her off balance. She stumbled, hitting her head on the concrete wall with a sickening thud. I didn't wait to see if she was okay. I ran. The hallway seemed endless, doors on either side. I could hear shouts behind me, heavy footsteps giving chase. I turned a corner and saw it, a window. Without hesitation, I threw myself at it. The glass shattered, and I felt a searing pain as shards cut into my skin. But I didn't stop. I tumbled out onto soft grass, the cool night air hitting my face. I was in a backyard, high fences on all sides. But there, in the corner, was a gate. Freedom. I ran like I'd never run before, ignoring the pain, the fear, everything except the need to escape. I cleared the gate in a single adrenaline-fueled leap and found myself on a quiet suburban street. Lights were on in nearby houses. I ran to the closest one, pounding on the door. "Help! Please, call the police." An elderly woman opened the door, her eyes widening in shock at my appearance. I must have looked like a madwoman, covered in blood and dirt, my clothes torn. "Please," I gasped. "They're going to kill me." She ushered me inside and called 911. As we waited for the police to arrive, I collapsed on her couch, the adrenaline finally wearing off. The next few hours were a blur of police statements and hospital visits. The Carters were arrested trying to flee the city. Their house of horrors was raided, revealing a sophisticated human trafficking operation that had been running for years. As I sat in the police station, wrapped in a shock blanket, Detective Johnson approached me. "You did good, Sarah," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "Thanks to you, we've shut down one of the biggest trafficking rings in the state. You saved a lot of lives today." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. The ordeal was over, but I knew the memories would stay with me forever. In the days that followed, as I tried to piece my life back together, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to my old job, couldn't bear the thought of walking into strange houses with people I didn't know, but I could use my experience to help others. I started volunteering at a shelter for trafficking survivors, sharing my story, offering hope to those who thought all was lost. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a life with purpose. And every time I helped someone escape their own personal hell, I felt a little bit stronger, a little more like myself. The Carters had tried to break me, to turn me into a commodity. But in the end, they'd only made me more determined to fight back. Against them, against the system that allowed such evil to exist, against the darkness that threatens to consume us all. I was no longer just Sarah Reeves, real estate agent. I was a survivor, a fighter, a beacon of hope for those still trapped in the shadows. And that, I realized, was worth more than any commission I could have ever earned. The moment I saw the glint of metal in the driver's hand, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. This wasn't just a ride. It was a trap, and I had walked right into it. As the car sped down an unfamiliar road, my heart raced, and one thought echoed in my mind. How could I have been so stupid? It had started innocently enough. I was hitchhiking across the country, a journey of self-discovery after graduating college. My backpack was light, my spirits were high, and the open road seemed full of promise. I'd had good luck so far, meeting interesting people and seeing parts of America I'd only dreamed about. That fateful day, I'd been standing on the side of a quiet highway for hours, my thumb out, watching car after car zoom by. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, when a blue sedan finally pulled over. The couple inside looked harmless enough. The man, probably in his late 40s, had a friendly smile and crow's feet around his eyes. The woman beside him was younger, with long blonde hair and a gentle face. They introduced themselves as Jack and Linda. "Where are you headed, son?" Jack asked, his voice warm and inviting. "West," I replied. "Wherever the road takes me." Linda laughed, a melodic sound. "Well, we're heading to Phoenix. That west enough for you?" I grinned, relief washing over me. "That'd be perfect, thanks." I tossed my backpack in the trunk and climbed into the back seat. As we pulled away, I felt a sense of excitement. This was what hitchhiking was all about: meeting new people, sharing stories, experiencing the kindness of strangers. For the first hour or so, everything seemed great. We chatted easily about my travels, their life in Phoenix, the beauty of the landscape around us. Jack was a salesman, he said, and Linda worked from home as a graphic designer. They had been high school sweethearts, married for 20 years. But as the sky darkened and the miles ticked by, something began to feel off. I noticed Jack taking exits I was pretty sure weren't on the way to Phoenix. When I mentioned it, Linda quickly changed the subject, asking about my family back home. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. I pulled out my phone, intending to check our location, only to find we had no signal. Of course, we were in the middle of nowhere. "Everything okay back there?" Jack asked, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. There was something different in them now, a hardness that hadn't been there before. "Yeah," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just checking the time." Linda turned in her seat to face me, her smile no longer reaching her eyes. "You must be tired after all that walking. Why don't you get some rest? We'll wake you when we stop for gas." I nodded, pretending to settle in, but sleep was the last thing on my mind. I needed a plan. I needed to get out of this car. That's when I saw it. As Jack reached to adjust the radio, his jacket shifted, revealing the gun holstered at his side. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a wrong turn or a misunderstanding. These people had intentions, and I was certain they weren't good. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. Jumping out of a moving car would be suicide. I had to wait for them to slow down, to stop. An opportunity would come. It had to. Hours passed, the landscape outside growing more desolate. We were deep in the desert now, red rocks and cacti replacing the grasslands we'd started in. Jack and Linda had grown quiet, occasionally exchanging looks that made my skin crawl. Finally, mercifully, I saw the glowing lights of a gas station in the distance. My heart leapt. This could be my chance. As we pulled up to the pump, I steeled myself. "Mind if I use the restroom?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Jack's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Sure thing. Linda, why don't you go with him? I'll fill up the tank." My hopes deflated. They weren't going to let me out of their sight. Linda smiled, all sweetness and light. "Come on, honey, let's freshen up." As we walked towards the small convenience store, her hand on my arm felt like a vice. I glanced around desperately, looking for anyone who might help. But the station was deserted, save for a bored-looking clerk inside. In the grimy bathroom, I splashed water on my face, my mind racing. I could try to signal the clerk, but what if he was in on it? What if Jack saw and decided to cut his losses, to use that gun? When we returned to the car, Jack was leaning against it, smoking a cigarette. "All set?" he asked, an edge to his voice. I nodded, my mouth dry. As I reached for the back door handle, I saw my opportunity. My backpack was still in the trunk. "Oh, could I grab something from my bag real quick?" Jack hesitated, then shrugged. "Make it fast." I walked to the rear of the car, my heart pounding. As Jack popped the trunk, I took a deep breath. It was now or never. In one fluid motion, I grabbed my backpack and swung it with all my might. It connected with Jack's head with a satisfying thud. He stumbled, caught off guard. I didn't wait to see if he'd fall. I ran. I heard Linda scream, heard Jack's angry shout, but I didn't look back. I ran like I'd never run before, my feet pounding on the asphalt, then on sand as I veered off the road into the desert. A gunshot rang out, the bullet whizzing past my ear. Still, I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. Only then did I risk a glance behind me. In the distance, I could see the gas station, now just a pinprick of light. There was no sign of pursuit. I'd made it. But I wasn't safe yet. I was alone in the desert, miles from anywhere, with no water and no idea which direction to go. The adrenaline that had fueled my escape began to wear off, leaving me shaky and terrified. I forced myself to think logically. The highway had to be east of me. If I could find it, I could flag down a car, get help. But could I trust anyone after what had just happened? I started walking, using the stars to guide me. The desert night was cold, and I shivered in my thin t-shirt. Every sound made me jump. The rustle of a snake in the underbrush, the hoot of an owl overhead. I kept expecting to hear a car engine, to see headlights cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing. As the sky began to lighten, I heard something that made my heart soar, the distant rumble of traffic. I quickened my pace, ignoring my aching feet and parched throat. Soon, I could see it. The highway, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desert. I stumbled onto the shoulder just as the sun was peeking over the horizon. A semi-truck appeared in the distance, and I waved my arms frantically. To my immense relief, it slowed and pulled over. The driver, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, looked at me with concern. "You okay, kid? You look like you've been through hell." I nearly wept with relief. "Please," I croaked, my voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "I need help. Some people, they tried to..." I couldn't finish the sentence, but I didn't need to. Understanding dawned in the driver's eyes. He reached behind his seat and handed me a bottle of water. "Drink this," he said gently. "Then we'll call the cops. You're safe now." As I gulped down the water, the reality of what I'd escaped began to sink in. Jack and Linda weren't just giving a ride to a lonely hitchhiker. They were predators, hunting for victims on the open road. How many others had fallen into their trap? How many hadn't been as lucky as me? The police took my statement, their faces grim as I recounted my ordeal. They told me Jack and Linda matched the description of a couple suspected in a string of disappearances across 3 states. Thanks to my escape and description, they had solid leads to follow. In the days that followed, as I gave more statements and tried to process what had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling of how close I'd come to becoming another statistic. My carefree journey of self-discovery had turned into a nightmare, one that would haunt me for years to come. But as I boarded a bus back home, my hitchhiking days firmly behind me, I realized something. I had survived. I had outsmarted them, outrun them. They had tried to make me a victim, but instead, they had made me a survivor. The open road still called to me, but now I knew its dangers as well as its beauty. I would travel again someday, but with my eyes wide open, aware that behind every friendly smile could lurk a hidden danger. My journey of self-discovery wasn't over. It had just taken a turn I never expected. And in the end, I had discovered something vital: my own strength, my will to survive. It wasn't the lesson I'd set out to learn, but it was one I would carry with me always.